All right. Hello, everyone. To those who stayed after that awesome fireside chat, welcome. We are going to chat now about diversity, equity, and inclusion. We have wonderful panelists up here. To my left is Tara August, Senior Vice President, Talent Relations and Special Projects at Turner Sports and Bleacher Report. Then we have Cathryn, Chief Commercial Officer at OPENBet, and Robyn Slutzy is at the end, who is a partner at Arctos Sports Partners. So we've got a pretty diverse group in terms of the areas of sports that you all touch. So I would love to kind of just kick things off if you could kind of tell us each what your role today actually entails.
Simple question.
Yeah.
So I oversee all of our on-air talent across all of our sports and platforms for Turner. So TNT, TBS, Bleacher Report. So basically yelling at famous people all day, most of them named Charles Barkley. But I also oversee our internal sports DE&I efforts through a group that we call the PAC. So handling that internally.
Thanks for having me. Again, this is an amazing event. I'm actually from the sports betting side, so I think, as a lot of you guys know, in the U.S. we recently, there's a lot of legislation going on, so sports betting and gambling is kind of a big piece of what's happening with some of the leagues and with a lot of the rights and stuff going on. So my company, we actually do sports betting technology as well as content. We work with a lot of the major operators like FanDuel, DraftKings, Caesars, and we're kind of just driving the whole sports betting ecosystem. So I'm kind of on the supplier side in the product technology and commercial.
Hi, I'm Robyn, nice to meet everyone. Thanks for having me. I'm a partner with Arctos Sports Partners. We are the first institutional private equity firm really in the world to be investing minority positions in sports teams. I lead our fundraising business at the firm, and so as this panel knows, I say I'm not a super deep in sports, haven't had a background in sports. I've really been a private equity investor my whole career and sort of learning the sports business over the last couple of years.
Awesome. Well, we are excited to have you all. And I want to start us off. I think a lot of times when people think about diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts, right, it's a seminar that HR is hosting, or it's a training that you have to do, or it's making sure that you're interviewing a diverse set of candidates. And it seems like, it can often seem like a lot of boxes to check, but hopefully and ideally it goes much deeper than that. So I'm curious, how do each of you sort of think about the way that you interface with and can impact those efforts within each of your organizations?
So like probably every company in the world and all the organizations that everybody here works for, 2020 was a hard reset, right? It was an eye-opener professionally, personally, certainly for our country, but for the world. So when we started to rethink where we were in diversity and inclusion, where we wanted to go, and how things had shifted, we very quickly acknowledged it's got to be a multi-pronged approach. So it's just not diversity in hiring, it's also pipeline building, it's internal mobility, it's candid conversations, it's trainings, right? It wasn't just, hey, let's bring in some speakers and maybe buy some books on diversity. So we really tried to design a multi-pronged approach that was going to educate people differently, but also open up conversations that we had never had before. And hopefully that, internal staff were going to walk through it and find sort of their space, because not everything was going to work for everyone. And then since then, we've just been on this journey, and knowing that it's continuing to evolve. We learned a lot, but I think that the best thing is, like, we have momentum enough to say that we have progress, but we have such a long way to go. And what we keep saying internally is, it's this marathon, but the finish line keeps moving. And that's sort of how it should be, because you're not going to cross the tape and be like, whew, that was hard, but here we are, we're done. Let's move on to the next thing. No, there's going to continue to be, what do we need to do next? What are we paying attention to? And what does staff need? And also, what are our fans and our viewers looking for?
Yeah, so I think from my perspective, if you look at sports betting, it's pretty relatively new industry within the United States, and I think it's really about kind of trying to bring more women into the ecosystem, not just on the workplace side, but also from the consumer side. There's a lot of great statistics. Like, I think they say 50% of sports fans are women, yet when we look at who's actually making sports bet wagers, it's 20-30%. So I think that there's a lot of opportunity for companies like ours and other suppliers to really think about what do you have to do to engage kind of bringing in that consumer, right? So sometimes it's about like highlighting women's sports, as we're doing sports betting. Like when you look at a lot of these operators out there, like a Caesars or a DraftKings, you think about their brand ambassadors they use. Right now it's very male represented. So I think it's about really improving the ROI of a lot of these emerging, I guess, industries and markets as well too. Women are an untapped market, I think, or an underrepresented market as a consumer, and I think there's a lot of opportunity. So I think it's, you get better ideas when you bring in more women. You get better ideas when you have, women in leadership roles who can actually talk and engage and think about how we can really drive more players and more end users into this kind of ecosystem.
And Robyn, before you start, I want to ask you, you guys are obviously, this is an internal conversation for you guys, but you're doing some pretty interesting work on this front externally. So I'd love if you could kind of touch on both of those.
Yeah, sure. So to that point, I think about DE&I impacting my sphere in two ways. One is in the firm building piece and how we build an inclusive and diverse firm. And we are 2 years old, so I get the benefit and the privilege of contributing to the firm building piece, and so I can spend more time on that. And the other point of it is externally, how do we have impact in and around DE&I in the industry that we operate, and how can we work alongside teams and owners and leagues to do more in this area and be better in the way of DE&I. The firm building piece, if I can, because I'm super passionate about it. So before joining Arctos, I was co-head of private equity due diligence for JP Morgan's private bank. And there too, a lot of my focus in and around DE&I was on the firm building, recruiting, retaining, promoting women and minorities within our investments business. But also externally, I put out $10 billion on behalf of private bank clients a year into private investment opportunities, and really making sure that how we choose to invest has a DE&I component to it. So incorporating that lens into our decision-making process was important. On the firm building side, I got to learn a lot during my time at JP Morgan, and I'm now have the opportunity to implement a lot of that as I build our business and our firm at Arctos. So if you'll allow me, I'd love just to share like some of the key takeaways that were really eye-opening to me when I was leading this initiative at JP Morgan. And my colleague Cathryn is here, and she's heard a lot of this before. But like when you think about recruiting and attracting great female talent, it never really dawned on us at JP Morgan that women and men read, internalize, and receive resumes differently. So like one shocking fact that helped inform how we crafted even resumes was that when a man reads a resume and looks at all the required prerequisites, they typically feel they need to meet somewhere between 50 to 60% of those prerequisites in order to apply for a job. When women read the same resume, I don't know if anyone here wants to guess, but like, what would be the parallel? What would you think the percentage of prerequisites a woman feels they need to meet in order to just apply for a job?
100%.
100%. So like, that was shocking to us. And what it did for us at JP Morgan was it changed the way we wrote resumes. And we're doing some of that at Arctos too. The other big aha moment for me with women, and we talked a little bit today about mentorship, is that there's this huge difference between mentorship and sponsorship. And women tend to be over-mentored and under-sponsored. And mentorship is great, but actually it's having a great sponsor, someone who's willing to use their political capital and advocate for you, that really drives a woman's career. And so we developed a lot of programs at JP Morgan, which we're now incorporating into Arctos to make sure that the women in our team have great sponsorship, not just mentors. Another cool aha moment for me over the course of my career was we had a problem at JP Morgan because we were losing women at the VP level. And the natural instinct there was to think, well, of course we're losing women at the VP level. We're in like a high demanding job. People at the VP level are starting to get married, starting to think about families, and they're just sort of leaving the industry. Well, what we realized was that we were actually losing women and men in equal percentages at the VP level. The problem was when we went to replace them, we were replacing them disproportionately with men. Because unlike our junior talent, where there is structured recruiting processes, when you got to the more senior ranks, people tended to rely more on their networks. And when you rely on networks in a male-dominated industry for recruiting, you end up hiring more men. And so that's something that we're very deliberate about as we build out Arctos, which is, we've got great partnerships with groups like Make a Play Foundation and Spelman College, and we're being really deliberate about how and where we recruit at all tiers of the organization. The other thing that I don't think has come up today yet is just like the concept of men as allies. And like, it's great that women are sitting in a room talking about how to improve opportunities for women, but if the men aren't part of that conversation, change doesn't happen. And so what we did at JP Morgan and we do at Arctos is for every recruiting committee, or we have a DE&I committee at Arctos, we make sure that every committee is chaired by at least one male and one female. And that everything that we do in and around DEI is sort of top down, that the leadership is bought in, that we reinforce how important it is. And I would say the last thing is largely around just setting goals and monitoring yourselves and accountability and checking in. And so we have at Arctos internal goals for our diverse population. And actually we set them last year and they were three-year targets, and we've already met or exceeded them, which we're really proud of. All right, so that's the firm piece, and I just wanted to share because it's all been very powerful, for me over the course of my career. On the industry piece, sorry, do you want to add to that?
Well, I was just going to talk about the really important two tenets that you talk about: sponsorship and also networking, and marrying those things together. And something that we've seen, like we talk about pipeline a lot, because when you go out recruiting for VP level positions and people say, I can't find diverse talent that are qualified for this position, be they, a woman or a person of color, and really trying to be cognizant of how we start the pipeline early, and sponsorship, like you said, with colleges, HBCUs early, to provide sponsorship, not just mentorship to young people, but sponsorship, bringing them into the fold, giving them entry-level jobs so that they learn how to be a sales planner, a sales executive, or in production, be in places that they aren't, traditionally, a door isn't open for them early enough so that they are qualified when they get to the senior levels.
Yeah, and we actually have done something exactly like that at Arctos, because the pipeline problem is like, I don't want to hear it, right? Like, figure it out. We hired a super talented D1 level athlete who had 6 months of work experience out of college, who didn't meet the experience threshold that we would typically look for an associate, but we stretched, hired him after 6 months, and decided collectively that we would invest in and train him because we saw the potential.
So I'm curious, because I think people in journalism and in my industry as well see the same thing, where you want someone with experience, but the experience pool is going to look very similar. So how do you bring other people on board with the concept of making sure that we invest in a pipeline and start to change the talent that produces internally?
So, I think a lot of it actually has to do with representation, because, coming from, I guess, the gambling, gaming industry, it's a very male-dominated industry. And I think what happens is a lot of women just say, well, I don't want to go into it because I don't see a lot of women in it, right? Whereas I think there's a great example, FanDuel, Amy Howell, she's the CEO there, and she's the CEO, and her staff is 50-50, right? And what does she do? She brings in women from other industries, right? And I think that's the piece that I think is sometimes, under represented in the sense that there's a lot of value. There's smart people. There's smart people in many other industries. And if you're looking to diversify your team, you're looking to diversify your talent, go look in another industry and bring them in, because you'll find a smart woman or minority or diverse candidate. And then I think part of it also is, how do you have that representation at that leadership level? Because many women might say, well, I don't see anyone that looks like me, so why would I want to be part of this industry? And I think, that's kind of where from the top you have to kind of seed those spots, within, your board, within your leadership team to make sure there's good representation, because then that's also going to draw diverse candidates.
You're absolutely right. One of the first things we had to do was say, we're not looking in the right places. You keep saying, oh, we can only find this. It's like we had to really broaden people's mind to look at different industries, look at different types of schools, stop looking, I work in television, stop looking at people who are just coming from other networks.
Right.
People have translatable skills, and we're looking for diverse backgrounds. The other part of the conversation is internal mobility. Like, this can't all be about external recruitment and bringing in new faces. That's a big component of it. But we want to work in a place where people feel like they can move along throughout the business and learn other sides of the business because they've got the skills, or someone will teach them how to go from sales to production, or how to go from social to marketing, and opening up those doors. And we've had really good feedback that, internal employees feel like they're not forgotten. We're not just concentrating on recruiting new people. We're investing in the people that are here that we want to support.
So what sort of processes have you put in place, or are you in the process of putting in place to help ensure that, right? Because those are obviously, you have to be very intentional about doing that and creating those opportunities and making sure that the employees know where they are, where they can go, and where you want them to go.
So internally, we launched a program called Passport, where you can apply to work for one of our special events if you don't traditionally go to that event. So you can work in accounting or finance or social, but if your team doesn't traditionally get to go to NBA All-Star Weekend or the match, you can apply to go have a job at that special event. And the stories that have come out of that have been phenomenal. And you go and you support another group, and it's just to give you, a different lens and exposure, and just, maybe build some passion that you might have been watching from afar. We do such amazing things, but we also realize only a fraction of our organization is able to work on it. They might work on it from home, but they're never there for the payoff. So that's one internal program. An external program that we have is working with. We worked with an organization called My Brother's Keeper, which was an affiliate of the Obama Foundation, and it's young black men in Chicago. And we offered them the opportunity to come out and have real jobs during our special events. So it was about mentorship, but it was about really having hands-on experience to expose them to different occupations. Like, they're not thinking about what goes into being a television producer or flying a drone or being a camera op. So actually giving them hands-on, and they got paid. It's a real opportunity. It's real information that they can put on their resume to help build a pipeline to now expose them, to a different type of industry.
That's great. Robyn, we'll come back to you. I feel like we got sidetracked from your external conversation, but I'm sure a lot of this is tied in. Yeah.
Yeah. So external, we invest in the sports industry, we take minority stakes in sports teams. As owners of sports teams, one of the most obvious ways for us to have impact is to help the leagues and teams achieve more diversity in their ownership stacks and their capital structures, which is really lacking currently. And so so that's one piece of like, how can we have impact on the industry? How we do that won't happen overnight, but some of the things we do today is we incorporate DE&I questions. We have an ESG and DE&I questionnaire that we provide every team as part of our due diligence process. So like right away, we're signaling that this stuff matters to us. We're asking the questions. It's important to our firm. So in our investment committee presentations, when we go and ask for approval to make an investment, there's always a page that outlines where this team and ownership group sort of sits in this area, how we rank them. We are in the process of building a database of ESG and DE&I metrics where we will track and monitor our teams along these lines. Not to score and judge, but really with the eye to build a database of best practice where we can start to share some of this information and things that teams are doing across both teams and leagues. so that we can be a thought partner to the industry in this area. And then the other piece of it is on ownership, and so we are thinking creatively around how we raise capital from. I'm trying to be careful with what I say because we haven't done anything in this area yet, but we are thinking as in partnership with some of the leagues around ways to bring maybe more minority but diverse individuals into a pool of capital where collectively they can then invest alongside us into some of these teams. And so that's a way to start, but I think if we do that and a team can represent that, blank % of their ownership group is minority and female, that feels like a good starting point. And we also talk about maybe bringing some of these individuals together, giving them exposure to what the experience of owning a team is like. And so we can educate and also open up networks so that maybe they start as a minority investor, but with the eye to being a control investor one day. So those are just some of the ideas that we're kicking around.
I'd love to get your thoughts. I think something that's really interesting to me, one of my focuses at Sportico is on women's sports. Women's sports properties, obviously I'm sure we're all aware, usually have much lower valuations than if you're talking about buying an NFL team or an MLB or one of the big 5 sports leagues. But what women's sports teams have done, and we've seen this in the WNBA and the NWSL and here in Los Angeles with Angel City in particular, is sort of change the ownership model. Instead of having one controlling owner and a handful of minority owners, right? You have 100+ people on the cap table at Angel City right now, where everyone is buying in a smaller stake. And obviously there are challenges then when you talk about the management of the team, but you're then opening the door for people to come in. You're really lowering the barrier to entry. Do you feel like there's a point in where we see that start to translate, beyond the NWSL and the WNBA into other sports leagues?
Well, you have that a little bit now. Like most teams have a control owner and lots of limited partners, but maybe there is still that control owner and limited partners as opposed to more equitable ownership. Maybe not something that I'm seeing yet. I'm trying to think of something that might be like a corollary to that. I mean, look, allowing institutional capital into sports teams is like one step a little bit in that direction as far as providing more access to different types of investors to enter this industry. So maybe.
It's an interesting question too. I know Eric Jackson, my colleague who's in the room next door right now, he wrote a piece about how the Broncos sale sort of embodied the limitations for diversity in NFL ownership right now. And so obviously I think there's a number of questions around continuing to diversify ownership, and realistically what are the obstacles that are there.
It's a huge obstacle,
right?
Because there aren't that many diverse individuals that can afford to buy a team,
right?
And the Broncos deal with Melody HUDSON being the first Black woman to be part of a bid for an NFL team and win it's a big deal, and I would imagine that carried some weight in the overall bid for that asset.
Right.
The leagues are focused on this for sure.
It does seem to be a kind of a more public priority, right? I imagine a lot of DE&I efforts, I feel like, were very internal, and I feel like they're now becoming a much more external process. But I'm curious, obviously all of you are in massive industries in sports, whether it's media, sports betting, which is just continuing to grow, and also just on the financial side. How do you think about the work that you're doing impacting others in your industry, right? How do you think about spreading this beyond your organizations?
Yeah, so I think it's about bringing awareness of DE&I. I mean, there's always a general awareness, but as we kind of first touched on it, sometimes it's just checking the box, right? And I think it's really about kind of bringing, sort of elevating the idea that DE&I is not just checking the box. It actually can, increase ROI. It can actually bring in more business. It can actually, captivate a bigger audience. It can improve fan engagement, on the sports side and the sports betting side. And I think really just kind of showing what the value of that investment is. If you invest in it, there's tons of statistics of, boards that have better diverse representation, and, they outperform others that are more homogenous. And I think that kind of goes in any parts of the industry in the sports ecosystem.
Yeah, we've been fortunate. My Brother's Keeper program, we launched that. We ran a story on it during the match, and then our partners at CBS said, "How did you do that? We want in. Can we help?" So when we just did the NCAA tournament in New Orleans this April, they expanded it. So they did a female version of it, and we did the male version. So it was great just to have that partnership. We work with our league partners, too, who call us and say, how can we help? How can we partner together? We want to do an event. Will you televise it? Will you provide coverage? Do you have ideas? So really trying to, be partners in it instead of having our individual solutions. And then learning from each other. There's just some programs that work and some that need to be fine-tuned, but being able to listen together and really try to create things that have value. I think about when we give updates to our organization, we very much try to give, here's where we are with diverse hiring practices and resources and funding and all of these buckets. But I think about former Commissioner David Stern. One time there was a report that came out about officials and things, and his response was, "We will not be held to the tyranny of statistics." And I thought that was so funny because he was just like, get this report out of here. And that's a little bit what I think about the data of diversity, because you can frame it differently. It is important as a report card. It is important to show, are things moving? But you need momentum and progress, because if it was just going to be a black and white score, well, then people would just be grabbing women off the street and giving them jobs or giving funding, more money so they could check the box. It doesn't tell the whole story when you just rely on the data.
So how do you measure the full story then, right? Because so many companies internally still want data and numbers, and they want to see the ROI, and all of those things are still so important in any business.
One, the data matters, right? You have to use that. That is one of the metrics. We use a lot of anecdotal testimony, trying to have conversations. What I love the most that we use is that the target keeps moving. So when we're in our DE&I task force meetings and trying to figure out where we are and information, and we're getting comments from staff of, well, why aren't we doing this? Or I'm not happy about that, or can I see this? I'm like, guys, they're complaining about different things. That means they're moving the target. That's a good thing. If they were still complaining about the things that weren't effective 2 years ago and saying, hey, you still haven't solved this, then I think we'd be in a world of trouble. But the fact that they're going, okay, you did this, but now I want this, or I want to see that, or how about, so to me, that's a metric that that there is momentum, there's at least an evolution.
Robyn, you look like you had something to add.
I think goals matter. I think accountability matters. That's why at Arctos we set targets and we monitor against those targets. It's why we ask the question of all our teams in due diligence, and we track and monitor the progress. One of the cool things that I learned recently that I didn't know is that there is, Caitlin, help me out, it's like the diversity and ethics board within sports that actually gives the leagues and teams that participate a gender and equity scorecard.
Oh yes, the TIDES reports.
Yeah, the TIDES reports. There is a scorecard. I think it matters, but again, I think you got to set targets. They are moving targets, but they are targets, and you've got to have accountability.
I think one of the most interesting things from my perspective, something like the TIDES reports, right, is you look at some of the scores and they just have remained unchanged. So how do we get past the point where people see the numbers and see that they're lacking in the diversity within their league or their organization or their team, but there's not enough, we're not addressing the problem quickly enough, right? How do we actually start to expedite the pace at which we are addressing some of these issues?
Speed is tough. Speed scares me truly, because we could all do it overnight. It wouldn't be sustainable. That would terrify me when we did set goals and targets, if then by tomorrow our executive leadership looked different and there were just more women walking in. We're not setting anybody up for success. We're not setting the organization up for success, and we're not setting the individuals up for success if we're providing them opportunities and jobs that they're not prepared for and that they can't handle. That's the fastest way to go, well, I hired a woman, but then she was terrible, so I'm never going to hire one again. That's not where we want to be. So speed, I think, is difficult to assess. It's valuable because you don't want to say, hey, we're going to need 10 years to make just an inch of progress. But I think you really have to be careful about keeping people accountable to a specific timeline.
Operators engaged to bring more women into the ecosystem. That's like creating odds and bets that are tied to women's sports or women players, right? So there's a lot of things that I think we're trying to really spearhead to push forward in the sports betting industry externally, and I would say externally plus our internal lenses. We have speakers that go on expert panels to talk about products, thought leadership in this industry. We make a point to put women up forward, right? It goes with representation. We know that if people say, oh, look, OPENBet, they've got like a smart product, person up there talking about technology, maybe a woman is going to want to come work there, right? So I think kind of making those like real specific like efforts to make sure that, externally we're well represented from a diversity and inclusion perspective, as well as, kind of championing our women and diverse individuals within the organization.
I think as far as it was a problem or an area of great opportunity, like the numbers, right? There's still less than 2% of owners within the sports industry are female or diverse, and less than 2% of capital in the private equity industry flows into the hands of female and diverse investors in any given year. And so like lots of room for improvement there, lots. What I am most proud of is how genuine and sincere everyone at our firm is around doing our part, getting this right, and pushing the ball forward again, both insofar as how we create a diverse and inclusive firm and culture and community, and how we can potentially have impact externally.
And I want to ask you, this is the last question, and then we will take questions from you guys in the audience. We have a few minutes left. Sports are obviously incredibly diverse, right? You think about the athletes who all of us are covering or touching in our different industries. How do you think about making sure that your business, A, reflects the consumers that you're trying to target and that are in your existing audience, but also the properties that you're covering and representing?
Yeah, I mean, I think you just have to make an effort to make sure that it's represented, right? I mean, and again, like, if you were to look at a sports betting app right now, you can bet on every male sport and maybe 3 female sports, right? And I think it's just trying to continue to push representation in all facets, not just on the talent piece and the people piece, but the product piece as well.
Awesome. Well, we will open it up if you guys have any questions. We have time for 1 or 2. Yes?
So we've had a presence at NABJ and NAHJ at least 15 years, probably a lot more than that. Personally, I think it's important for 2 reasons. You find diverse candidates, but also for our internal staff. They learn, love, especially in ABJ, just my personal experience, I always say it's like the coolest organization where you meet smart people that you want to hang out professionally and personally. So it's dual-sided. We've hired people at the conventions, right, when we've got hiring there. But the important part is like looking outside those groups now that we have such a good milestone foundation with them. I'm on one of the boards. Like now we have to keep going with other organizations that are less represented, AAJA, LGBTQ plus organizations. So really challenging our leadership to be present at different types of conventions and conferences, and our staff to rally behind it and us to put the dollars in it as well.
Great question. Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, then I will lob the final question to you all. If you could kind of wave a crystal ball, and what is a goal that you have for your organization, let's say in the next 5 years, that you would love to achieve or attain?
For us, we're sort of a bunch of organizations all in one, right? We're at the micro, we've got platforms, and that's an organization. And then we're our sports organization, which is multi-networks. And then there's an entire organization now that owns us. We just merged with Discovery, and now we're Warner Brothers Discovery. So you can look at the snapshot a lot of different ways. But I'd love there to be more diversity at the bigger picture, higher level when the big report cards come up, that even at the highest levels that our diversity numbers have improved.
I have no idea where that came from. We're having some funky tech stuff happen. Thank you all for bearing with us. Cathryn.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'd like to see 50-50 representation. I mean, and if I were to count, I mean, we've done metrics like on our senior leadership team, which is not even, the executive leadership team. We've got 3 women out of 20, right? I mean, that's appalling to me. And I tell my CEO every day, this is appalling. And so, 2 to 3 years from now, like, what are we going to do to bring the other women in? Are we putting in the best practices to ensure that, we're bringing more women into our ecosystem and promoting the women within? So, I mean, to me, that's what everyone's goal should be, at minimum 50-50 on,
I'm curious, how does your CEO react to that? I'm taking notes.
I mean, look, I mean, I think we recognize it's a problem. We recognize it's an industry problem, specifically in the sports betting and gambling space. I mean, it's, we're pretty much on parity with I would say, what's in the industry, but to me, that doesn't justify it being okay, right? I mean, again, there are examples and outliers of organizations where you have a woman leader at top who has now made it 50-50. You bring people in from outside of the industry. So, I mean, I think everyone's intent is good, and it's just kind of getting through the inner workings of how do I actually make that change.
And Robyn.
I love that. I agree we've got goals and targets, but I'd love to stretch on them. Like, I don't want us to get complacent and say, check, we met our, whatever it was, 30% goal. Like, 50-50 would be better.
There
And
you
I would
have
love to have a diverse investment product out there along the lines of what I talked about before.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much for your time and for your insights. Thank you all for joining us, and hopefully you guys will stick around. We've got one more panel and then a lovely cocktail hour and conversation. So thanks, everyone.